Good morning, Will Gadd. Welcome on VH Berries.
Good morning, VH Berries. How's it going?
Extremely well. In another dimension, I will be talking to lawyer Will Gadd, but this is not the case.
Yeah, well, I don't know I mean, we've all got pasts, right? And I was almost going to be a lawyer. I took the LSAT, was off to law school, but then life changed and I became what I am now. It's a little bit different than a lawyer.
You have a very inspiring journey and career, and I would love to know more about it because you just finished, for example, a trip to an Iceland that is starting with the letter B.
Yeah, Baffin Island. It's an island off the coast of Canada and in the Arctic on the eastern side of Canada. And amazing trip. And yeah, we're back. We're safe. We didn't get eaten by polar bears or pull large rocks on ourselves. So it was a good success. And we found out quite a lot about possibly how the Earth formed as well. So very exciting trip for sure. The Baffin trip was really good. We went there to help a scientist recover samples of rocks that tell us how the Earth formed. These rocks are really unusual in that they actually have traces of water from when the Earth was first forming. And that's always been the big question. Was that water developed as Earth formed, or did it exist in what was here, and how did that process work? So we went on a science trip, but we also had to climb the rock walls to get at the samples for the geologist, Lydia Hollis, and then avoid 30-some polar bears on an island that was not very big. So we had a lot going on there. It was wild, but we pulled it off successfully and back home. And yeah, I don't know much about you, unfortunately. Are you a climber or anything, or it's not your world?
Absolutely not. I never climbed on ice or any mountains.
I don't even know where you are. Where are you? This is really unfair. You know all this stuff about me, and I don't know very much about you at all.
I'm also in Canada, like you, and I'm in Montreal.
Oh, very good.
So, if I understood correctly, Will Gadd, you help some scientists because they don't have the skills that you have to escalate every of these very high mountains and rock for you to go and try to take some very small rock and take them back to the lab.
Yeah, the idea is to get these samples and they have chunks of the sort of the magma, what's inside the Earth from the very earliest parts of when the Earth formed. And you can tell kind of how the Earth formed and how much water was there and where that water might have come from and why. And this wonderful woman that I was helping out, she's a scientist in Europe. And yeah, she had been working off like little samples, maybe a few hundred grams of rock. And we were able to get her kilos of samples. So she says this will keep generations of graduate students busy. And amazing place. You know, the north of Canada often feels remote and like this scary place. And that's kind of how I thought about it too. There's polar bears and it's very cold. And then you get up there and yeah, my perception of Canada definitely changed. You know, you think of Nunavut as being part of Canada, but Nunavut was here a long time, and the people of Nunavut were here a long time before there was a Canada. So to them, we're kind of an add-on, a recent event. And I love that idea. And then how they managed to survive in that environment is really interesting. And we learned a lot from our Inuit partners in the trip. They were the ones who were helping us move around on the island and get to the island that we were on. For starters, it was just off the coast of Baffin Island. So yeah, came back with a very different understanding of this country we call Canada, which is sort of theoretically actually a recent add-on. We all live in Nunavut because they were here first. So it was a different perspective. I really enjoyed both the geology and the science and the climbing challenge, but also getting to learn about Canada's north.
Absolutely, Will Gadd, because as you just mentioned, this Baffin Island is located in the Canadian territory of Nunavut. This is the largest island in Canada and the fifth largest in the world.
Yeah, it's a massive island, and we were actually on a smaller island just off the coast to get these rocks. So we're on an island off the coast of an island, but just amazing history there with the people, and the climbing we were doing was, that's what I do. I love to climb, and we were also doing some paragliding, paramotoring stuff up there just to find the areas we needed to sample. So it was a lot of layers to that trip, but the thing that sticks with me most is, first of all, it is cool to figure out how the Earth formed, right? That's a pretty cool mission. Let's go figure out how the Earth formed. No big thing. But then also just how the people of Nunavut live and how long they've been there. It is theoretically Canada, but as I said earlier, we're relatively recent. This place, the history of Canada was the First Nations people here, and then we showed up. So, it's a different way to look at it. It's got its own language in Nunavut, as is true in many other parts of Canada as well. Still to this day, there's obviously the original languages here, but we don't see them as part of everyday life in Canada. We're either in English or French, and these things seem so remote, but they're not. They're our country, and they are, we ought to have more official languages. It'd be like Switzerland and have a few more. You've got English, French, Inuit, and maybe some of the Blackfoot or different languages that have been here a lot longer. So it was kind of an awakening for me, and that's a discussion we're having in Canada, obviously, about our past. I think growing up here in Canada, I was like, well, we did a pretty good job with our First Nations, and that's the reason that's what you learn in school, right? Canada, we're the good guys. I think it's becoming really apparent now that we did an absolutely terrible job in our interactions with the First Nations. And when you go to a place like Nunavut, and that history is there, and you read about it in the newspaper, I think we're having kind of a national reckoning in Canada with our past. And I think it's overdue. But I don't know. I'm just an extreme sports athlete. I'm not the person making policy on this. But up in Nunavut, we did have conversations with people, and then I have family members who are also from the First Nations, and it's time to deal with these things, and I'm glad we are. It's difficult, but I'm glad we are.
Now it all makes sense, because I would think at the very beginning that, the oldest rocks might be under the ocean, but this is not the case, because centuries ago and thousands of years ago, the level of the sea was actually way higher. So it makes sense now to go and find the rocks in the mountains.
Yeah, I mean, the geology of these places is really complicated, as it is everywhere on Earth. It's these rocks are from the magma, which is probably measured in billions of years or something, and then relatively recent, 100 million or however many years it came to the surface. But what we think of as these solid lands have been like jumbled up and pushed around and broken into pieces and spread all over the world, and then uplifted into the Himalaya. In the tops of the mountains here in where I live in the Rockies, we have fossils that are right at the very, very top. And obviously those were once getting deposited at the bottom of an ocean. So it's a very, the world's an interesting dynamic place for sure, both geographically and culturally and geologically. We live in an interesting place.
Well, Gadd, managing risk is central to your work and your athletical approach as a prominent ice climber and also as a paraglider pilot.
Yeah, well, I think we all manage our risk, right? I tell the story about developing a program for my kids because my kids are a lot like me. They go for it, right? So they're getting, they've already, especially the younger one, she just goes for it. So she was on just about first name terms with the nurses in emergency here at Gadd. So we had to develop something different, and risk management is basically recognition. Yeah, we've got a problem. And then mitigation. What are we going to do about it? And then you judge the effectiveness by the overall the results over time. So for the kids, it was like, all right, what are our hazards here? And so when the kids and I were out in the mountains or hiking around somewhere, we developed this 3-level thing where the first level was bumps and bruises, and maybe they'd be hiking along a trail in the mountains that was just a bit steep, and I'd be like, all right, kids, what would happen if you fell down here? What's the hazard? And their answer would be bumps and bruises, where that's the first level of the hazard. You just fall down, no big thing. Okay, bumps and bruises, we're good. Are we going to do anything about it? Well, no, we're not going to run on the rocks. We'll just hike. We'll just run on the flat parts of the trail because that'll be really fun. Okay, great. Here we go. And then we'll be up in the mountains and it'll be a little bit more hazardous. Maybe there's a big drop off and we'll look at it and the kids would be like, okay, Dad, this is getting serious now. That's hospital train there. If you pitched off, you'd end up in the hospital. Okay, what are we going to do about it? And well, I'm going to hold onto your hand and we're going to move closer to the edge that's away from the hazard, the fall potential spot. We're going to get close to the rock on the uphill side and we're going to move slower. And that's how we're going to manage that. And then we'll be in some heinous place like your hometown city there of Montreal, where there's like cars everywhere and they're going for it, and it's like I'll have them by the hands and be like, okay, kids, what would happen if you ran into traffic here? And they'd be like, death, Dad, definitely death. And they might say it in French because they're better bilingually than me, but and what are we going to do about it? Well, we're going to look at the lights, we're going to watch for cars, and we're going to manage this a bit and make sure that we're trying to get the outcomes that we want to get. And that's all risk management is: recognition, mitigation, and are you doing enough of either? And if you miss a risk, then it can take you out, and if you don't manage it properly, it can take you out. And I see a lot of that breakdown happening in the mountains, where people will recognize a risk and say, yep, this is a problem, and then ignore it. The mitigation is where it falls apart. So with my kids, I'm always asking them those questions. And a few years ago, they were arguing in the treehouse outside my window. I built them this fairly lethal treehouse. Actually, it's like 3 or 4 meters off the ground, and there's rocks underneath it. It's like, this is kind of a hazardous place. And we had some rules about being up there. And so I'm listening to the little kids up there, and they're arguing about what would happen if they fell out, whether it be bumps or bruises, hospital or death. And they're like, well, we're not going to fall out. We're going to sit down here in the middle, and we're not going to stand by the edge. And the other one was like, yeah, but we could forget. And if that happened, we could fall off. And would that be hospital or death? And my daughter was like, well, if you landed on your head, it would probably be death. And it doesn't really matter, right? Like, they were doing their risk management, and they were sort of 6 to 9 years old at that point. And to me, that's what it's all about. Now when we get to the playground, they attack. It's like, go. They're going to have a great time. They'll be more careful if they're hanging by their knees for the monkey bars. Maybe how are we going to manage that? Maybe give each other a spot. But if you can manage risk, then you have freedom to do all the cool stuff in life. And that's what we're after. And then even with all that, people make mistakes, and your risk management is not always perfect. And to me, that's important as well, is to recognize our own fallibility and that we're going to do things wrong, and try to build systems that incorporate that so we more reliably get the outcomes that we want. But yeah, long answer to your question, but that's kind of how I look at it, and then use all those same tactics when I'm guiding in the mountains. I'm also a guide, so I'll be out there with my guests and say, hey, we're definitely in hospital train, so we're going to slow down, we're going to put the rope on, here's what you need to do, here's what I need to do, and manage that as best we can. And even with that, sometimes it goes wrong, unfortunately, and we have to decide if that possibility, that consequence, is worth that risk or not. Maybe it isn't. And to a lot of people, climbing mountains is not worth the risk, and I totally respect that decision. Don't do that. If you don't think it's worth, if climbing mountains doesn't fire you up, then don't do it. That's great.
Well, Gadd, you are definitely asking those questions. For example, in the TEDx conferences that you made recently, you discussed about the accident that happened in your field and how little it can sometimes be.
Yeah, I mean, if in whether I'm guiding or doing my own sports, and I don't guide like I do my sports, it's a bit of a different plan, but the end goal is always the same: to come home at the end of the day and to have a good day out there, enjoying yourself. Like there's a downside to risk in that you can get hurt or worse, but there's also an upside in that if you don't take risks, then nothing cool happens, right? Like if you don't take the risk and call the date up and say, hey, you want to go out, then, you won't have that magic of whatever happened, or disaster. Could be disaster. But hopefully you get the good things in life by taking risks. You apply for a new job that maybe seems a little bit difficult to get. Like, taking risks is essential to do cool things in life. Just trying to make informed decisions about how you take those risks is important. And yeah, in my world, in the mountains, there's a lot of variables, and I have to accept those variables before I go into the mountains, or I'm not doing a good job of managing them at all.
There are a lot of variables, and in the same conferences, the main key for you is not really the material or the weather, but it's more about the attitude and the mindset.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you took that out, because I think that's true. I mean, the greatest power we have to manage risk is the kind of our understanding of our own minds and how we think. When I was 18, I was much more comfortable with poor outcomes. If I, broke my leg or whatever, I was willing to go for it. And having had bad outcomes enough, I'm not as enthusiastic about them as I once was. They aren't that fun. So, we have to understand ourselves. And I'm not going to tell an 18-year-old not to do something, but I hope to help him or her make a better decision through some of the things that I write or speak about that might reach them, because I do have a little bit more of an audience due to what I do as a profession, as an athlete, and as a guide, and as a filmmaker, and all these other things.
In a year, in definitive, Will Gadd, you are outside more than 100 days per year.
Yeah, I mean, when you called me yesterday, I was outside the woods, and that's where I spend most of a lot of time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it is funny. For you, that was quite unusual, but this I'm in my office/guest bedroom here in my house, and I try to avoid this as much as possible. But a lot of what I do is inside too. I spend a lot of time writing. I write a column for Canada's national outdoor magazine, Explore magazine. And I write a book or two about climbing and movement. So I do spend a lot of time here, but I try to balance that with spending a lot of time outside in the mountains or in the woods or hiking around with my kids or whatever, but just being outside. People are generally better when they're outside.
And for example, when I saw one of your videos climbing the Niagara Falls, there is a word, for example, when you are resistant to water, this is waterproof. I don't know if there is the cold proof, because you are cold proof. This is very cold and you're still climbing it.
Yeah, no. I mean, Niagara Falls, it was probably minus 20 or something when I was climbing it. It was very cold. But you get systems, like everybody has systems in their lives. Like, how do you go to the grocery store? The first time you go, it's pretty complicated, and by the time you're my age going to the grocery store, you got a system. You get in, you get out, it all works. And working with cold is the same. You get systems for it. And then traveling up north with the Inuit, they have really good systems. They're just different than mine because it's a different environment. And again, it's understanding. How well do you understand your own systems and the environment, and how adaptable are you? You can have the best systems in the world for one climate, one situation, but if they don't apply across a lot of situations, then you've got to change them, and nothing ever works everywhere. So, yeah, Niagara Falls is one thing, but I have to dress differently again when I'm doing something crazy like climbing ice for 24 hours straight. That's an entirely different system. And then when I'm guiding, because most of the time the people I'm guiding move as they should, slower than me, I have to dress in a different way again for that. And it's just systems. You figure it out if you're interested in it and get after it.
Well, Gadd, you just mentioned the question of the age, because you are in your 50s, and you often say that you are in a better shape and stronger now than when you were, for example, 25.
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm not, because I hurt my ankle mountain biking the other day. It was worth it. It was an awesome day. We were out mountain biking, and I twisted my foot and my pedal, and so I don't have very many injuries, fortunately. Right now I'm battling this injury, so I'm not as fit as I'd like to be. I'm not out there as much as I'd like to be, but yeah, overall I'm pretty much as fit now as I was in my mid-20s. So yeah, getting older, you don't have to get less fit. But to a certain point, I mean, biology has caught up to me. I need more rest now than when I was younger. But I can still climb as hard as I did in my 20s or in early 30s. And yeah, pretty stoked.
However, Will Gadd, you have to be fit because very soon you are going to put the fit into numerous new adventures. For example, a one in Antarctica.
Yeah, we're trying to do a research project in Antarctica, and it's the only continent I haven't climbed ice on. So I'd like to help out with some research on how how climate change is affecting some of the peripheral ice pieces in Antarctica, and I'd like to climb one of them and show people what those look like, because you always read, the biggest chunk of Antarctica is breaking off, and then there's this picture of this iceberg that could either be the size of my fridge or like the size of like Alberta. I don't know which. So I want to go and have a look at it and put a human there for scale, and I think it'll be a neat trip for that. So then we'll also do some interesting work with scientists who are looking at the creep rate and expansion rate of the cracks and why and what's in there and other things related to that. So it should be a pretty cool trip. And then have a couple other climbing trips. I'll actually be in Quebec this winter, ice climbing there, and looking forward to that, and doing an event in Pont Rouge outside of Quebec City. And yeah, pretty fired up. Lots of good trips coming up.
I'm very curious about this trip in Antarctica. You just said that this is going to be your first time, and I believe that the preparation has to be huge. It's the most important part, I guess.
Yeah, there's the preparation equals performance, and preparation is actually not my strong suite at all. I'm kind of a little bit of a hyperactive athlete kind of guy, so it doesn't come naturally to me. But I've learned, again, it's systems and understanding. If I don't prepare well, then the outcome is not good. And so I'm spending a lot of time figuring out how to manage some of the unique hazards of Antarctica. I mean, obviously it's cold, that's part of it, but these are really big pieces of ice on a scale that I've only maybe seen in Greenland or elsewhere before, and how they're going to work and how I'm going to get a film crew in and out of there. It's complicated, but we're figuring it out. And because I know it's important, I'm working away at it. And yeah, for me, it's always the same in life. If it's not interesting, then I don't do a very good job at it. And Antarctica is very, very interesting. So I'm willing to do the work and prepare properly. And it's like competing as well. I don't think I was ever super exceptional as a kind of genetic athlete. But again, I figured out how to prepare and then how to execute. And that's why I had any degree of success as a competitive athlete. I might compete again this winter too. There's a comp in Colorado I'm kind of interested in. So I'm thinking about I haven't competed in a few years, so we'll see whether this talk of being as good as I was when I was younger is holding up or not. But yeah, preparation is important.
In what I can call the Will Gadd ecosystem, there is this phenomenon interest in ice because, for example, recently I got the opportunity to record an episode and discuss with the British climber Hazel Findlay, which is only focusing on real rock. So I'm wondering, where does it come from, this interest for frozen water?
Well, I think growing up in Canada, it's cold here, right? Like, you either play hockey or you do something else. And I played hockey some, but I just, my family wasn't into competitive hockey. I played a lot of pond hockey, shinny, etc. But there was this other, like, what do you do with winter? And so you ski. And for me, I was lucky enough that I had parents who were climbers. So I got into ice climbing. And then I moved to Colorado, which is, has okay ice climbing, but it's pretty warm there. So I didn't do a lot of climbing for a few years. I was more of a competitive rock climber. I think Hazel has a background on that as well. And then moved back to Canada and sort of put everything I had into ice climbing with the goal of winning a couple of major competitions. And I did, and here it is almost 30 years later, and I'm still doing it. It's interesting. Never gets boring.
This explanation can be summarized with two words. Canmore, Alberta.
Yeah, I mean, where I live is right in the Canadian Rockies. It's super mountainous and cold. And as a kid, my parents would take me out every weekend and do one sport or another, skiing or ice skating or sometimes climbing. And it really shaped who I am. And I've always lived with brief stints in Switzerland and a few other places in the Rockies, either in the United States or in Canada. It's the same mountain range. And it's definitely home for me. It's where I feel most at home in the world. And it's a beautiful place to be from.
And ironically, Will Gadd, climbing ice and rock is a way for you to travel everywhere in the world. We mentioned just before Antarctica, but there are also other continents.
Yeah, I've climbed ice all over the world, and that's been a way to meet people and see different places and put up new routes. And yeah, wherever you go in the world, there's climbers. And so you get into their culture right away. And that's one thing I love about climbing and paragliding, these kind of mountain sports. You show up in a mountain range anywhere in the world, and there's like climbers climbing and people flying and skiing, and it's a real entree into a community that might be harder to get into otherwise. You know, and if I go to Japan, it might be a little bit harder to meet Japanese people in their world. But through ice climbing, it's like, hey, we're all going ice climbing, and then we're going to go to the hot spring afterwards. And next thing you know, you've had this great interaction with people that maybe you wouldn't get to meet otherwise, or not as easily. So the sports are great, but the people are what make it really interesting for me.
And you just mentioned the climbing culture and its values. How would you define it?
Well, I think climbing, it's an odd sport because most of climbing is not a professional game. There's a very few of us who are professional climbers. 99% of the people out there, 99.9% of the people out there, like I guess like other sports, are doing it primarily just for fun. But it also has high risk. And so people ascribe a lot of meaning to that riskier activity. You know, it feels very intense when you're doing it and very meaningful. And it shapes certainly who you are and what you think is important in life. And that intensity binds people together in a way that sports do as well. But when you're really trusting somebody with your life, those values that you share are much more important. How you look at the world and what you're trying to get done in the climbing environment, and just deep relationships with people that you form climbing or paragliding or some of the other sports that I do, the sort of higher risk sports. And I think the values in climbing are honesty. You know, it's like, did you actually do what you say you did? Because you have to be honest. If you're relying on somebody about what their capabilities are or aren't, it matters. You can get killed if they are not who they say they are. So climbing has a very low tolerance for bullshit. And I appreciate that about it. It's, you know, you can get away with a lot on your resume, you know, when you're like applying for a job, you can be pretty creative, right? But if you do that in climbing, you're going to get killed. So that culture is one of, you better be honest about who you are and what you do and report that and engage on that level. And then it also is intense. When you're out there in the mountains doing intense things with people, it forms strong relationships. And I do some work with different branches of the military, and I think a lot of the vets that I talk to and the active people that I talk to, it's the same thing. When you go through these very intense situations with people, those are lifelong friendships and relationships. It takes things deeper. So as far as a value, I'm not sure what the value is of that, but it certainly is valuable to me to have it and those relationships. Most of my really good long-term friendships started with sports of some kind, and then grew from there.
I also observe, Will Gadd, that you are often climbing those extreme roads and mountains alone, and you are at the complete opposite end of following a long queue of mountaineers clinging to a single rope.
Yeah, I mean, usually I have a partner. I do solo, meaning I'd climb without a partner sometimes, but most of the time I like a rope because if you fall, you die, and life is pretty good. I'd like to keep living it. And a rope helps with that. So I do certainly take risks, but I try to make them decent risks, and using a rope is part of that. And then you're totally right. I do like to go places that other people haven't been and do things that other people haven't done. People often ask me, why haven't you climbed Everest? Well, like 5,000 people have stood up there, and more of the power to them, but it's just not that interesting anymore when thousands of people have done it. It's like, what's really interesting to me are things that are different, that people haven't done, and you go and do them and you figure them out, and that's just really, really interesting. The danger of climbing isn't what makes it interesting, it's the complexity of the problems you have to solve. The danger is just a a thing that makes it more important and adds some meaning to it. But another thing that people say is, well, you must be an adrenaline junkie. You do all this stuff. It's like, I don't like adrenaline. If you've ever almost wrecked your car, you get like a cold sweat on your arms and you feel terrible. Adrenaline's a lousy drug. But what's cool is executing complicated solutions to really interesting problems. That's what's interesting in life. And that's where I get my kind of high from, is figuring out how to go to Baffin Isle and move this wonderful geologist around in really complicated terrain and fly a paramotor in a really remote place and make a film about it with a great group of people and then climb a big route. Like, that's interesting. And that's what I like doing. The danger is a way to just keep your mind sharp and aware. So long answer to your question, but I like new places and doing new things. That's way more interesting than doing the things that have been done a lot.
And concerning the Mount Everest that you just mentioned, there is also a cost to have the permit to climb it. It goes from $11,000 to more than $90,000 US.
Yeah, I mean, climbing Everest is expensive, but if that's what you want to do, then awesome. Spend the money and go do it. I've done some climbing in the Himalaya and I really enjoyed it, but I was on remote peaks where there wasn't one other person on the whole mountain. And I loved it. And then you hike into the Everest Valley and it's just like this mayhem in the mountains. And to me, that's just less interesting, but a lot of people love it. And it's not about what I like or don't like. It's about, if that's firing those people up that are going to Everest, then right on. They're doing something cool with their lives. And I think that's the most important thing. It's like, are you doing something that blows your hair back? Are you fired up in the morning for your day? That's what's meaningful. So might not be for me, but a lot of things aren't for me. I'd make a terrible lawyer, in all honesty. We started the conversation talking about that, but I don't think I would have been that good at that. I'm a better athlete, guide, filmmaker guy.
And what is the most beautiful landscape that you saw when you, for example, arrived at the top of a mountain, Gadd?
Well, I think, I just love being outside and seeing new landscapes. That's just absolutely fantastic. Whether it's the Alps or the Andes or flying a paraglider. We flew paragliders across the United States one year and, just got to see that landscape. And there's immense beauty wherever you are. If you just wake up for the sunrise and see it, or you're out there and doing something, I just find the world almost anywhere is absolutely beautiful and interesting. And people are better, like I said, when they're outside. Like, you don't hear about trail rage, do you? Two hikers got into a fight about the trail. No, that happens on the road. People go crazy in this civilization. So get outside. It's beautiful. And I think people are better at being outside overall. So, yeah. Go outside. See beautiful things. And yes, mountains are beautiful. But I think that beauty's everywhere. You just have to see it.
We just have to see it. Gadd, merci beaucoup. Thank you so much for your time.
Merci beaucoup to you as well. And nice talking with you. And hopefully I'll get you to climb a mountain one day. We could do the same thing on top of a mountain. That would be cool. Interesting problem. How do we do that, huh? It'd be cool.